Highlight that tonight you'll hear reflections from this year's Democracy Summer interns as they begin a life-changing summer of organizing and advocacy. Also, updates on bills moving through the North Carolina General Assembly. And we also highlight why public comment at the State Board of Elections has never been more important. And then also, we'll talk about next steps following the devastating Supreme Court ruling that gutted the Voting Rights Act, the last major protection against racially discriminatory electoral maps, and also share how you can get involved as an elections advocate in your community and make sure you're at those Board of Elections meetings where they're talking about early voting plans and different voting. All right. And then we're also joined tonight by some of our incredible staff members who you can see here. To start off, please welcome our Executive Director, Adrienne Kelly.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you all staff, speakers, advocates, and donors for being here this evening. We are just 5 weeks out from a special birthday, one that will be celebrated with music, fanfare, and fireworks. The birth of this nation 250 years ago, the beginning of a democracy, nascent and imperfect, a hope and a dream about people having a voice in determining their own destiny, in those voices being heard, in those voices counting. We've come a long way from a country that was built on the backs of Black slave labor, a place where Native Americans were indiscriminately slaughtered, Japanese were put in internment camps, and women could not vote. Great strides towards inclusivity were made in the mid-1960s when Black people and their white allies fought for civil rights for all people. President Lyndon Johnson laid out a vision called the Great Society to end poverty and racial injustice. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on race, religion, sex, or national origin in voting, employment, or education. The Voting Rights Act was instituted in 1965, and many laws were passed that improved job training, provided scholarships and low-interest loans for college students. Medicare, Medicaid, and Head Start programs were instituted, and the National Endowments for Arts and Humanities was created. In addition, warning labels were put on cigarettes. This country has never achieved a perfect democracy. There have been ebbs and flows, successes and failures. And yet, for the last dozen years, and in particular in 2026, we find our country barreling to a period reminiscent not only of the pre-civil rights era, but of post-Reconstruction, having slipped backward to abandon laws that foster fairness, justice, and freedom for all. But folks, I have good news. That's where we come in. Democracy North Carolina is part of a movement that is answering this moment in history. The current legislative and administrative assaults on voting rights present an opportunity to engage and involve the public in determining their destiny, an opportunity to work toward a 250th birthday that is worthy of celebrating. We are here to right the ship, to hold back the oppression of people and the suppression of our votes. Democracy NC staff is resilient, talented, and capable. We work with coalition partners and advocates who are ready for the fight. We are investing in and have tremendous hope in the young leaders positioning themselves to carry the mantle of a true democracy forward. You will hear from some of those young leaders shortly. My question to you is, what will be your answer years from now when asked, where were you and what did you do in 2026 when the battle to ensure North Carolinians' voices were heard and votes were counted? Back to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Adrienne. We'd like to start off things tonight by looking towards the future and how much we have to learn from the leaders of tomorrow, particularly during these difficult times. I'm going to pass things over to Rev. Dr. Stefan Weathers, Program Manager for Youth Engagement, and two very special guests, Democracy Summer's second year friend turns this year, Debbie Camara and Alexia Chavez.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And I want y'all to get really excited, get really hyped. I know I can't see you, but just do that for me, and I'll imagine in my mind what you all look like. But I'm so thankful. Thank you, Alicia, for introducing me. As she said, I'm Reverend Dr. Stefan Weathers Sr. I have the pleasure here at Democracy North Carolina of being the program manager for young adult engagement. And what that means is that I get to lead a program called Democracy Summer, a flagship program of this organization that is now in its 27th year. I'm actually a product of that internship program as well, back in 2012. And so I'm really, really, really excited to welcome to you our 2 second years that we have for this year, our 2 second year friend turns, which means they have done this before. And they are back again to be mentors and to do some other exciting work within the organization. And so I'm going to turn it over to them so they can wow you, they can excite you, and really let you know how dynamic this program is and how we look to continue to make it so. Over to you, Debbie and Alexia.
Thank you, Rev. Steve. Hello, everyone. My name is Debbie, and I recently graduated with a master's in social work from UNCSC Chapel Hill. I was a policy friend turn with Democracy North Carolina in 2025. And I'm so excited to be back this year as a second friend turn.
Yes, and hello everyone. My name is Alexia Chavez, and I am a recent graduate of the best HBCU in the nation, North Carolina A&T State University. And I first joined Democracy North Carolina as a policy friend turn in 2024. And now I've returned this year as a second year friend turn.
Honestly, one of the reasons why we wanted to speak to Smith tonight is because Democracy Summer really does have an impact on the role of youth and the role they play in civic participation. Democracy Summer creates a space for youth to engage, lead, and recognize the power of our voices. Before I joined the program, I cared deeply about issues impacting my community and ensuring their voices are heard. But Democracy North Carolina helped me understand how policy and civic engagement all connect together to create lasting change.
Yes, and I feel the same way. Democracy Summer really gave me the opportunity to move from being interested in advocacy to really gaining that hands-on experience to actually do the work. And that's because we learn organizing strategy, we learn public speaking skills, voter engagement tools, leadership skills, but we also really learned how to build relationships and bring people into the civic engagement process in ways that feel welcoming and meaningful.
Thank you, Alexia. And that's why we are so excited that on June 1st, we are officially welcoming the 27th cohort of Democracy Summer Friend Turns. This cohort will be comprised of 12 college students from across North Carolina who are ready to step forward and lead in their communities.
And one thing that makes this program really special is that students are not just observing, but they're actually organizing. They're speaking directly with their community members and with their lawmakers to address issues that are impacting our everyday lives. And additionally, every friend turn receives a stipend so that students from all backgrounds can fully participate in our program, regardless of any potential financial barriers.
And over the course of the summer, friend turns receive hands-on training in organizing, advocacy, civic education, communication, and movement building. They work closely with Democracy North Carolina staff and community leaders across the state. And they learn what it looks like to build power alongside communities that are too often ignored in the political process.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite parts about the program is the mini grant project. And this is where every Friendturn gets the opportunity to design and implement their own meaningful civic engagement project that's based on the needs of their specific campus or community, whether that's through voter registration, education, mobilizing, or just building overall excitement.
And this year, projects will focus on 4 campuses in North Carolina: AT&T, UNCG, UNC Chapel Hill, and NCCU. Past projects have included concerts, movie nights, civic engagement dialogue, candidate forums, voter registration drives, and creative community events that have reached thousands of North Carolina's college students.
And what's powerful is that these ideas come directly from the students themselves, because a lot of times we as young people know how to reach our peers, and we know how to create spaces that feel engaging, accessible, and just connected to the issues that students care about most.
And this summer, our work will continue to build directly into something we are especially excited about: Youth Advocacy Day on June 24th at the North Carolina General Assembly.
Yes, and on June 24th, that day, young people from across the state will come together in Raleigh to rally, hold a press conference, and meet directly with members of the House and the Senate to advocate around issues impacting their lives and their communities.
And what's most exciting is that it won't just be Democracy Summer Friendturns there. We'll also be joined by Common Cause Fellows, high school student advocates, and young adults recruited through Jamon Bryant Heron's Bridge Fellowship Project.
And the Bridge Fellowship is now in its second year and supports young adults ages 18 to 29 who are not currently enrolled in college, who are often overlooked but incredibly important group of emerging leaders.
Jamon has been building relationships with young people across North Carolina who are eager to have a strong voice in decisions affecting their futures, from voting rights and education to housing affordability, healthcare, and economic opportunities.
Mhm. And I love Youth Advocacy Day. What excites me most about Youth Advocacy Day is that it brings together so many different young people from different backgrounds and different experiences, and all showing up because they believe their voices matter.
And honestly, that's what Democracy Summer is all about. It's about helping young people realize that democracy is not something happening somewhere far away. It's something we build together every day by consistently showing up in our communities.
Yes, and we're incredibly grateful for everyone who supports this work. Your investment in Democracy Summer and the Bridge Fellowship is helping build the next generation of organizers, advocates, and leaders across North Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie and Alexia. We're so excited to have our cohort of Friends Turns just about to begin. And as you've heard from Debbie and Alexia, Youth Advocacy Day is about so much more than just one day. It's about equipping student leaders, young adults across North Carolina with the tools that they need to raise their voices, to advocate, as they said, for the issues that mean most to them. And so, one of the things that we're going to be doing throughout this call is fundraising to support our Advocacy Day, Next Generation Advocacy. We need the voices of these young people to energize our movement. So throughout the course of the call, you will have an opportunity to make a gift of any size. They all help to support Youth Advocacy Day. You can click on the QR code that you can see on your screen right now, which will take you directly to a donation page, which supports 100% of the activities that will take place on June 24th. It will cover transportation costs, training costs, feeding the young people who come, and we look forward to a remarkable day of tremendous advocacy for our young people. So I hope that you will consider making a donation through the QR code, or we've also dropped a link in the chat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Shannon, for that exciting information. And then we also just dropped in the chat where you can go to demandco.com/givebutter if you're ready to make a donation today to support our Friend Turns this summer. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit to get into the legislative, judicial, and advocacy updates that I know that many of you are eager to learn more about. And I'm going to pass it over to our new policy director, Brian Kennedy. Brian, please take it away and lead us into those updates.
Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon or good evening, everyone. So for the nitty-gritty, in this next section, we're going to highlight the three big buckets of work that have direct consequences and implications on voters and in our elections. And these are impacts not just for the 2026 midterm elections, but for years to come. The 2026 legislative session has already kicked off and is in full swing. And so we're going to start off by lifting up some bills that we're tracking, as well as the status of leftover bills from last year's session. And there's plenty of hot goss, as I like to say, to talk about. Then we'll discuss some of the latest rules that are coming out of the State Board of Elections. And those are really going to demonstrate how election work is truly a year-round effort and not just on election day. And then, of course, we'll talk about the latest blow to our voting rights with the Supreme Court decision on Calais in the Voting Rights Act. But first, we're going to pass it over to Joselle Torres, our communications and legislative advocacy expert, who's going to give us some updates on what's happening in the legislative body right now. Joselle?
Thanks, Brian, and good evening, everyone. My name is Joselle Torres. I'm our communications manager here. You might have seen me pop up on your screen because I am trying to keep y'all updated about everything happening at the GA. So be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads, and Blue Sky so you can know what's happening in real time because these bills are moving pretty quickly. The first one we're going to be talking about is HB 958. Election law changes. This is a bill that was first filed in April 2025, and we've been monitoring it closely ever since. This is kind of a catch-all bill, a monster bill when it comes to election administration changes. It would include modifying previous ballot counting deadlines from 3 to 5 business days, specifically kind of going back against what happened in 2024 with SB 382. It would also prohibit the state board and county boards from encouraging or promoting voter turnout in any election. It would require voter ID for military and overseas voters, and it would prohibit ranked choice voting and other kind of election administration changes. And so this is a pretty big monster bill. We could also see this be a catch-all bill for other things if additional anti-voter measures were to come about. If you're already receiving our emails, you may remember contacting lawmakers about this last year. And if this bill gets moving pretty quickly, we'll be sending out another email. So be sure to stay locked in on social media and checking your emails frequently. Another anti-voter measure is reducing the early voting period, which would cut a full 7 days from the early voting period. So right now, it would start at the third Thursday before an election, and this bill would move it to the second day before the election. It'll also limit early voting in municipal and special elections to 10 days. Another bill we're tracking is HB 1231, no voter registration changes at the DMV, which would eliminate the ability to update your registration on the DMV website or at the DMV physically. So it would now require voters to head to the County Board of Elections to make those changes. And really, HB 1231 and HB 1084 and HB 958 are all out of the same anti-voter playbook. You might have heard of Cleta Mitchell. She was the lawyer that Trump asked to find votes in Georgia in 2020. Well, she's an architect behind a lot of these anti-voter provisions, and her home is here in North Carolina. The upside is that lawmakers have also filed HB 1230, which would prohibit federal interference in how we conduct elections at voting places here in North Carolina, and it would protect a voter's private data. So there are some good bills that are coming out. We are going to keep monitoring them. We're going to be pressing lawmakers and encourage you to do the same thing to protect voter freedoms here in North Carolina. Now we're going to shift to some local bills. There's a pool of bills that we're tracking at the local level, and there's typically an information gap when it comes to the peoples in the communities hearing about what's happening in Raleigh at the state legislature, but it's going to affect them locally. And as a reminder, the governor does not have veto power for local bills. So he can't veto a local bill, it would just automatically become law. So one we're tracking right now is HB 38. And it would change how it would shift how members are appointed in Jacksonville, North Carolina. So right now, there are at-large districts and ward districts, and it would shift these single-member districts to at-large, which means right now, if you are in the city of Jacksonville, and you are in a specific neighborhood in that ward, you can vote for your representative. An at-large position means the whole city can vote for that. And so when that happens, when we shift from single member to at-large, it diminishes Black voting power in predominantly white cities and counties. And Jacksonville, North Carolina is predominantly white. So we really want to preserve the single ward districts in this community because there is a historical Black voting population. Our Eastern Regional Managing Organizer, Lucas, has been doing a lot of work on the ground with folks in that region, and he'll be talking more about that here shortly. Another bill we're tracking is in Forsyth County, which would cut the terms of county commissioners and school board members from 4 years to 2. And they would actually impact the election that's happening right now. And so in November, the folks that are on the ballot, whoever gets elected, their term would now potentially be what they thought would be a 4-year term would now be a 2-year term. And in Pink Hill, there's a bill that would require municipal elections to be held only during even years moving forward. I also read this morning Durham County is considering the same thing. And so while that can be a cost-saving measure for county boards that are kind of already stretched thin, we know that we like to keep municipal elections and presidential elections separate sometimes because that helps keep voters motivated to keep their registration up to date and they can participate every year. And then these really top level races don't overshadow some of the local races. So these are a few of the local bills that we're like keeping an eye on, and that would have a direct effect on voters locally. So be sure to check your email again and follow us on social for any of those updates. One of the other things that we're going to be watching are constitutional amendments. But before I get to that, I want to talk about the veto garage. And the veto garage is just that, a garage where vetoes can be parked. We're in a short session. So everything that's kind of happening this year is left over from last year. We're in a biennial schedule. So that means bills that were filed in 2025 can still be vetoed or passed if they already were in one chamber in 2026. And so there are some leftover bills. Actually, just last week, the North Carolina House overrode the first veto of the year, HB 87. And that's a bill to opt the state into a federal tax credit designed to support private school vouchers. We're also paying close attention to the other vetoes that are in the garage. Yes, and it will slow down. We're also paying close attention to the remaining vetoes, which include Senate Bill 153, which is the North Carolina Border Protection Act, which would force local agencies to work with ICE and potentially harm immigrant communities across North Carolina. There's a trio of anti-DEI bills that would impact universities and public education. And there's a freedom to carry bill, which would allow virtually anyone over the age of 18 to carry a gun without a permit or any official training. So those are some vetoes that we are going to be monitoring. And then at the same time, these constitutional amendments have kind of come in a flurry in the past few weeks as well. And the reason why these constitutional amendments have been filed is because they're used as a way to rally voters to the polls so they can vote on the constitutional amendments. And also sometimes they're a way for bills to be filed if the bill filing deadline has already passed. And so the first one is a property tax levy limit, which would limit the ability of North Carolina counties to raise revenue for things like EMS, the fire department, waste management, fixing potholes in your roads. And when there are funding shortfalls, like no state budget, we're the only state in the entire country that doesn't have a state budget, counties rely on other sources of revenue like property taxes. So that has passed in the House and Senate and will go in front of voters come November. Another one is an income tax cap. Now it's titled Lower Taxes for All NC, so it sounds exciting and enticing. But again, this is going to lower the ability for our state to raise revenue. And it's really going to be a win, more or less, for corporations. And so that has passed the House and Senate as well, and will be heading to voters in November. Now, the other few, the constitutional right to farm would lock agricultural practices into the state constitution, impacting rural communities and water quality. The right to work would also make NC's right to work status permanent and harder to reverse. So if we think about what happened on May 1st with the amazing teachers rally and strike that happened, this seems particularly telling that this constitutional amendment was filed right after that. And so it would make it harder for unions to protect workers. I also skipped over require photo ID for all voters. That is passed actually in late 2024. And we know that voter ID right now is something that you have to head to the polls. This would just enshrine it into our Constitution. One of the other ones is a Council of State vacancies. So this would limit the governor's ability to replace any Council of State members who vacate their positions, restricting him to a list of 3 candidates proposed by the political party of the departing member. And then one of the last ones on here is shifting the way our school board, the State Board of Education, is appointed. So right now, the governor appoints the superintendent of public instruction. The superintendent of public instruction appoints who is on the State Board of Education. And right now, this constitutional amendment would remove the governor's appointments to the State Board of Education and make them all elected instead. The number of members would rise to 14, equal to the number of seats North Carolina has in Congress, and each would be elected to a 4-year term in a district drawn by the legislator. And our state legislature has a historical record of racial and partisan gerrymandering. So now there is the potential for our school board to be gerrymandered as well. One of the ones that I have not put on this screen today, because I don't personally want to give it airtime, is a highly controversial new bill filed by Representative Keith Kidwell, who's a registered oath keeper and a member of the Freedom Caucus. He proposed an amendment stating that the legal human life begins at fertilization, and under the language of this proposal, any healthcare provider who performs an abortion or terminates a fertilized egg could face severe legal consequences. And specifically, it could carry penalties as severe as life imprisonment for first-degree murder. This bill has been filed before. This is not the first time that this bill has been filed. It has been filed in 8 other states, but I know that people are talking about it, and we would be remiss if we didn't necessarily name it here today. So all of these constitutional amendments, all of these veto overrides, and all of the anti-voter bills that I just talked about, we're going to be keeping tabs on. We're going to be alerting you when these bills are moving or either being voted on. So please subscribe to all of our social media channels and to our emails so you can know when these bills are moving. They only need 24 hours notice to put a bill on the calendar. So now I'm just going to hand it back over to Brian to talk about our State Board of Elections.
Thank you, Joselle. So now for a few more updates and kind of turning your attention to something else that you might have, if you're getting emails from Democracy North Carolina, our lovely comms team has certainly made you aware of, and that's the happenings of what's going on at the State Board of Elections. So the North Carolina State Board of Elections is the agency that is responsible for administering elections in all 100 of North Carolina's counties. That board sets the rules that govern how ballots are cast, how they're counted, and how ballots are discarded. Its mandate is to ensure that elections are conducted uniformly, impartially, and that they are accessible to every single eligible voter. Unfortunately, the board has moved forward with some proposed rule changes that we think fall short of that mandate. And the voters who will pay the price are the same voters that in North Carolina's election laws always burden the most. That's Black voters, brown voters, poor voters, and young voters. Democracy in North Carolina has worked closely with the State Board of Elections over the past 30 years and has maintained a crucial relationship. And we think that's very important to ensuring that elections are run smoothly. We think it's important that they have the full funding that they need. And most importantly, we think that it's critical that they prioritize the interest of voters above anybody else. Due to the shift, this recent shift in leadership at the State Board of Education in this past year, we're seeing more and more overlap in a lot of the anti-voter movement and sentiment in the legislative body, as well as we're seeing that happen in the State Board of Elections as well. And it's pretty disheartening to see not just attacks on the legislative side, but on the administrative side as well. Fortunately, however, we are prepared to hold leadership on any position from any party and hold anybody accountable to the job that they are elected or selected to do. And so that's what we're just going to keep on doing. When the board proposes a rule change, it must be open to a public comment. And during that public comment period, every comment goes into the official public record, and the board must respond to substantive comments. So a strong public response, that's you all, a strong public response can slow, reshape, or sometimes even stop a rule entirely. And so we're going to lift up just two public comments that we're currently working on that are currently being considered by the state board. The first is around amplified sounds of the polls. The state board has proposed updating rules around buffer zones, electioneering, and conduct at sites. What's particularly concerning about these new rules, especially around amplified sound near polling locations, is that these rules, we know from language that they've said themselves, we know that these rules directly target community-led voter mobilization programs and events. And oftentimes, those are the programs that have had most large impact on bringing out Black, brown, and young voters to the polls. Events like Souls at the Polls have been a cornerstone to Black voter mobilization in North Carolina for years. In communities like Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte, Black churches have organized transportation, music, collective marches, and have turned Election Day into community celebrations and acts of resistance rooted in a long struggle for voting rights in the state of North Carolina. Party at the Polls events from Raleigh to Wilmington have used music, food, and community energy to make voting feel safe and welcoming, especially for voters who are new. And these voters who have every reason to distrust a system that has historically excluded them. Student marches at the polls at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, at Western Carolina University, at Duke, at North Carolina Central University have all turned out young hundreds of young Black voters. And so it's extremely important, we believe, that these events be allowed to continue. They're not disruptions in the electoral process, as an argument is being made. We believe, in fact, that they are the electoral process working as it should be. They lower barriers, they build trust, and they bring eligible voters to the polls, oftentimes folk who otherwise may not come. Restricting amplified sound near polling location might sound, it might not sound targeted or specific, but we know that those rules would effectively shut down that type of civic engagement, and we know that that's important to making sure that everyone's voices are being heard. Another change that we're very concerned about in tracking and submitting public comment to and asking folk to comment on as well are changes to the voter ID exception forms. So voters who rely on the ID exception form, those who might not have access to a qualifying ID due to the fact that they could have lost a document, they might not have transportation to get that documentation, they might have a disability, or they might have experienced a natural disaster. Those folk are already among the most vulnerable North Carolinians when it comes to our electoral system. The proposed rule change that the state is putting out changes how the voter ID exception ballot can be how a voter's ballot can be discarded based on that voter ID exception form. What it does is it lowers the threshold from a unanimous vote to a simple majority vote. In a situation where we now have all 100 county boards under single party control, we know that that is a direct threat to ballot access for thousands of North Carolinians. And in a state with razor thin margins at elections, both at the local and statewide level, changes like that have the potential of having significant impacts. North Carolina's voter ID law was reinstated in April of 2023 when newly Republican majority in the state Supreme Court reversed its own rulings in Holmes versus Moore, which has struck down earlier the law as racially discriminatory. Black voters make up 23% of registered voters in North Carolina, but 34% are without qualifying ID. And voter ID has been shown to suppress turnout among Black and Brown voters, even before they reach the polls. In 2024, voter ID was the second most common problem raised by callers who called into the North Carolina Election Protection Line. And roughly 74% of voters who cast ballots about 74% of voters who cast provisional ballots for lack of voter ID never returned with some form of ID and lost their votes and with their documentation and lost their votes entirely. So again, we lift up these rules not just because they're important and deserve attention, but because they highlight an important truth. And that is election work doesn't just happen on election day, but it is year-round work. It is not just about the one single election, it is about the next one, and then the 10 elections beyond that. Rules like these can have long and lasting impacts, not just on voters who are choosing to vote today, but on future voters of tomorrow. And so our public comments are extremely important in voicing our objection to these rules and really are critical in taking the opportunity to change the conversation. We know all too well what happens when things permeate the very makeup of our voting rights. And our regional managing organizer, Linda Sutton, Democracy North Carolina's longest standing employee, is going to talk next a little bit about the Voting Rights Act and how the decision with Calais is impacting all of us down here in North Carolina. And Ms. Linda, I'll pass it over to you. Miss Linda, I hear you are off mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So here we are again, folks. After the Citizens United case After the gutting of the pre-clearance requirement in Section 5, here we are again fighting for our voting rights. As most of you well know, about 6 months ago, our Republican lawmakers and judges rigged North Carolina's federal voting maps again by allowing the leadership to redraw them in a mid-decade session, effectively dismantling our state's historic Black Belt congressional district. Voting power diminished. Landslide for Republicans to control 80% of the state's congressional delegation accomplished. North Carolina did not arrive at today's crisis by accident. Few states have seen more landmark gerrymandering cases, and few legislatures have more consistently worked to diminish Black political power. We've been the testing ground for a long time, and I'm fed up. I don't know about you. I'm sick and tired of being fed up. What about you? And now here we are. Weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court essentially gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the last major federal protection against racially discriminatory electoral maps, the last protection. To say that it's been a rough 6 months on top of an already tough political landscape, well, it's an understatement. When they gutted pre-clearance in Section 5 states, states across the country just rushed to change their voting laws. We saw how that happened. But the effects of the Louisiana versus Taylor decision are grave. And many of us will likely be dealing with the aftermath for the rest of our lives. But North Carolina, like any other state still navigating residential segregation and racially polarized voting, knows better than most how Black and brown voters can be systematically and repeatedly pushed out of the electoral process. That decision wasn't a surprise after decades of the Roberts Court dismantling the progress achieved by the civil rights movement. But as the Black voters in Congressional District 1 can tell you, we've faced worse and we've come out on top. This is the power of the 15th Amendment and the refusal to let it go quietly without a fight. You're likely hearing a lot of talk about how the Voting Rights Act is basically dead, but we're not giving up that easily. This will not be the final word. Your vote cannot be taken from you. We are already seeing movements to file state-level voting rights legislation here in North Carolina. And there will be lawsuits. Majorities will shift. Maps will be one day redrawn. And there will be action. There will be resistance, because that is the will of North Carolinians, to be seen, heard, and to determine their future through the power of the ballot box. Now do you see what happens when we don't vote? We allow bad laws and policies to be enacted. And we can't get good judges and others of our choice to represent us. When we don't vote, we allow greed and power to deny basic rights for poor people. But we're changing that narrative. Starting this summer, Democracy North Carolina will be hosting dozens of town halls throughout the state on the Voting Rights Act and what comes next. How we will respond: our campaign, Black Vote Rising, is our response to this latest injustice. So along with our partners, we will be traveling from the Black Belt communities of Eastern North Carolina west to Charlotte, stopping in 12 cities at least, registering voters, training community ambassadors and advocates, and building the organizing infrastructure needed to bridge Black political power statewide. Throughout our state's history, communities have organized before the law caught up, and they will continue to organize fervently until justice is served again. That rooted relentlessness, sovereign power is what Black Vote Rising is built on. So when we come through your community, join us on that stop. But what we say is, they move the lines, but we move the people. We move the people into action. They know the power that people have, and that's why they must stop the people. But we will not be stopped. Yes, we may be bent, but we're not broken. We will rise again. We will reclaim our democracy, and we will win again. But we've got to wake the people up. Don't think it's all about just taking power from Black people. Everyone will be affected because it's not only our voting rights, it's our civil rights and human rights also. So what will happen next? Getting rid of the Constitution? How about not being able to vote at all? I think I've heard some ramblings about that. So let's level up, y'all, and rise up. We've got the power, so let's use it. Let's vote like we've never voted before, and vote early. So they'll think twice about cutting our early voting. So let us all rise up together. When we do that, we will win. I hope I can count on everyone on this call to double down and do a little bit extra, because we're in the fight of our lives. But we will rise again. We may be bent, but we are not broken. Back to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Linda. And as always, you know how to bring the house down. And to answer your question, I know I'm sick and tired. I know y'all are sick and tired too. So if you can drop some emojis in the chat or let us know you're sick and tired and you're in this fight with us and you're excited for this Voting Rights Act Town Hall series. And just Shannon is going to tell us more about the impact of the work we just heard about from Brian, Joselle, and Linda. So I'll pass it on to Shannon.
Well, it's really hard to come after Linda because she tells it like it is, and she really has. But one of the things that I just want to underscore that in moments like these, information matters. We know that lots of members of our community really don't know what is going on. And helping people understand that their voices still matter, even in the face of gerrymandering and all of these barriers to participation that are being put up. It's important that we're out there ensuring that our local communities are informed, connected, and ready to act. And that's why the Black Vote Rising Voting Rights Act town halls are so important. As you heard Linda say, they're going to be in at least 12 cities across the state starting this summer. I'm just showing you on the slide some impact of the cost of these events. A lot of times we don't highlight this in our calls, but obviously we can't do the work without the funds. And right now we're at a critical moment. So we just want to make you aware of some of the costs of making people aware of what the consequences of actions are right now. And also, while I have you, I did want to let you know that we have already raised $1,300 during this call to support Youth Advocacy Day. And we're so grateful for all of you who have made a donation. And it's not too late if you want to continue to support the students and the other really important work that we're doing. And then I'm also going to take just a second to say, we've put this in the chat. We noticed that a number of you are raising your hands, and we definitely want to respond to you. So if you have a question or a comment, if you could put that in the chat or the Q&A, one of the hosts and panelists will get back to you ASAP. But thank you for supporting our work and for understanding what it takes to do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Next up, we're going to hear from about elections advocacy and funding from our incredible organizing team. Lucas, please take it away.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you, Alicia, for doing such a great job of hosting us all tonight too. Um, well, thank you all for if you're still here with us, we appreciate you sticking on. We appreciate you taking time out of your evening to be with us tonight. If you've heard me speak this year so far, then you've definitely heard me say that this year is more important than ever that we monitor our local county board of elections. But before we get into the specifics of elections advocacy, I wanted to highlight an important piece of why going local is so important in our legislative and election administrative advocacy work. So, as you heard mentioned earlier, we're monitoring several local bills being discussed in Raleigh, including House Bill 1038, which would shift the Jacksonville City Council from a hybrid of single member and at large representation to all at large districts. We've been down this road before and know the reality of what turning a city council into 100% at large members can mean, diminishing black voting power and representation in predominantly white cities or counties. When city council members are at large, it means all voters living in a given town or city can vote for them. Single district members represent specific districts, or wards in Jacksonville's case, which only voters living in those areas being able to cast votes for those members. Currently, two of the six Jacksonville City Council members are elected at large. The risk of shifting to an at large system is that all of a sudden you could end up with the council that represents and looks like only specific neighborhoods, leaving other areas with no dedicated representation. Historically, this almost always has been at the detriment of Black communities. These voters in neighborhoods need council members that represent their best interests, not just those from or living in well resourced areas. We're going to keep talking about these hyperlocal issues because they're exactly why we have folks who live in these communities attend their county board of election meetings. People need to know what's happening in their local elections and hear about bills that are being filed at the state capitol in their name, especially when it could have such a huge impact on their voting power. And before I just move on to talking about early voting specifically, I do just want to give a huge shout out to the Onslow County NAACP for leading the charge on this advocacy work against this House bill, making sure that community members in Jacksonville and Onslow County know what's happening and having their voice heard within the community against this bill. So, with that being said, let's shift into early voting. Even though we're a couple months away from it beginning, it's pretty important that it's on our mind right now. Has early voting meetings across the state. Some have already taken place, some are taking place very soon, and we have to make sure that we're getting advocacy done. So, as the founder of Democracy NC, Bob Hall said years ago, the most important way to increase turnout in elections is strong early voting plans. And the only way to have strong early voting plans this year is with strong advocacy. Cannot stress that enough. Already, we have seen attacks on early voting sites, especially for students. We have seen Saturday and Sunday voting cuts in the primary. In the past, if local county board of elections approved bad early voting plans, we could count on the state board of elections to help. But as you heard earlier, recent changes to county board of elections and the state board of elections means we have to work harder than ever to ensure we have early voting sites and hours that promote turnout. And, really just to double down on how important it is to have these unanimous decisions on at the county board of election level. It is their duty. It is what they are sworn to do is to create these early voting plans, and they're doing a huge disjustice to the county and to the people within that county when they don't do that as it is laid out for them to do. So we need to make sure we're advocating for them in that way. So we have upcoming early voting meetings in a number of counties, including in Columbus County on June 9th, where the CBOE chair is trying to reduce early voting sites to only one site in the whole county, despite Columbus being the third largest county in the state by area. And so that's definitely one we need to be at. That's one we need to be spreading advocacy measures for now, making sure that people are at that meeting and advocating for more sites across the entirety of the county. We're also seeing a lot of exciting campus early voting site advocacy happening across the state. The possibility of having an EV site at Western Carolina University is actually looking more favorable this time around. And if you'll recall, NCA&T, the nation's largest HBCU, was denied a crucial early voting site earlier this year. However, participation at upcoming Guilford County Board of Elections meeting is imperative if we're going to have a shot at getting an EV site on campus this fall. So that's just another area to look out for, making sure that we're advocating for these sites and also advocating for accessible sites where we have campus voting sites already. And while it may seem like there's a tough road ahead of us when it comes to doing this work and it comes to advocating, I do just want to share a little bit of good news in that through continued advocacy for strong early voting plans, Durham County actually unanimously adopted their early voting plans in the past couple of weeks, which allowed for 10 sites across the county that are open for all 17 days of the early voting period. And so, though there's a lot going on right now, just know that we can still have very accessible early voting plans passed within our counties. So we need your help to make sure we have strong plans in the general election. We must have advocates in these meetings to hold board members accountable and ensure that they do their duty in unanimously passing plans. As has been mentioned, we can't afford to leave it up to the state board to make these plans. So please sign up to be a monitor for our county board of elections, fight for strong early voting plans, and help us increase turnout in the general election. Now, before I pass it on, I do just want to mention that another thing that we monitor as part of elections advocacy is the budgets for our county board of elections. Counties across the state are asking for increased pay for poll workers and filling vacant positions, and they're being told there's simply no money. More and more of the burden is falling on counties for funding due to decreased funding from the federal government. And these budget cuts have real consequences. And having our elections advocates who monitor these meetings report out on these changes and challenges helps inform our work in the fight for better election funding. So just as much as we're going out here and we're advocating for early voting plans, we need to make sure that we're doing the back end work and getting that funding there for it as well. So to talk more about this and why election funding is so important, I'm going to pass it over to my boss, Mark Hes Thompson, the organizing director for Democracy North Carolina.
Thank you, Lucas. And thank you for passing it to me. As you mentioned, as Lucas just mentioned, I'm going to talk about budgets and why they matter. I'm going to share with you information from our recent elections advocacy and election funding training. And I want to thank our partners who helped us with that training: Common Cause, Black Alliance, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, You Can Vote, and the NC Budget and Tax Center. So it's important to know that there have been over 60 changes in county elections director positions in North Carolina since 2019. The Carolina Public Press investigation found that this was connected to low pay for election directors. According to the Carolina Public Press, counties that paid the least in relation to their population tended to have election directors in place for the least amount of time. Counties with higher pay levels, especially in relation to their population, tended to have the highest tenured directors. The North Carolina General Assembly has set the minimum pay for county election directors, y'all, at $12 per hour. This minimum rate has not been amended since 1999. A 2024 analysis from the News and Observer showed that election director salaries vary widely from just over 40 per year in Hyde and Graham counties to about 190,000 in Wake County. In 44 counties, y'all, the 2024 election director salary fell below a living income standard for one adult raising a child. So this really matters, y'all. So we know that from past research that there is a correlation between election funding and voter turnout. The graph that you're looking at here shows this. Each dot represents a North Carolina county. The horizontal x-axis shows voter turnout in 2022 by county. The vertical y-axis shows the amount each county spent per voter minus the national average. Out of 83 counties illustrated here, Onslow County spent the least per voter and had the lowest turnout in 2022. In Surviving the Margins, an election funding report from the Southern Coalition of Social Justice, it explained that Onslow County had among the highest differences between requested and approved budgets across the 6 fiscal years that they studied. But We have good news. Thanks to funding advocacy, which we're asking you to do along with the Board of Elections monitoring and the early voting advocacy. We're going to ask you to also do election funding advocacy. Over the last couple of years, Onslow County has seen substantial increase in their funding. During the last fiscal year, 2024-2025, Onslow County Commissioners approved the budget over 60% higher than the previous presidential election year, fiscal years 2020 and 2021. So again, this shows that advocacy can work. So by attending public hearings, contacting county commissioners, we can make a real difference when it comes to funding, and that's going to make a real difference when it comes to voter turnout. So now I'm going to pass it to Shannon, who's going to talk more about ways you can help us to help with this work.
Thank you, Marquez. And thank all of you for being a part of this call. And thanks so many of you for making so many generous gifts for our fundraising for the Youth Advocacy Day. At this point, we've raised $1,500 to empower our young people to raise their voices at the North Carolina General Assembly on June 24th. Stay tuned to hear more about that. We'll also continue to fundraise to support the very, very valuable work that Linda and Marquez and Brian have all spoken about this evening. But I want to thank all of you who have made a gift tonight. Thank you for raising $1,500 for our friend turns. And I'll turn that back to Kamaria.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you everyone for contributing to the work we are doing this year every day on the ground. But we are here very close to the end, friends. So I just have a few reminders for you each. Now, first of all, join our Black Vote Rising tour this summer in a town near you. So stay tuned for more information. I am very grateful. I know our kickoff in Mecklenburg that will take place at the end of June in Mecklenburg County. I'm greatly appreciative to our community partners who are also 501c3. Thank you each. Now, next, I'm asking that you submit your public comment to the State Board of Elections and take action on bills at the legislature where they come your way. When they come your way, I apologize. Third, sign up to be an elections advocate. Become an elections advocate monitoring your local county board of elections meetings, and then canvass after elections and more. Fourth, have you ever been a vote protector with us before? We're talking about our friends in the yellow t-shirts. We'll be training new volunteers later this summer. It is so important that we have those individuals on the ground to protect the vote for each person who wishes to cast a ballot. And lastly, check out our digital voter guide. It has all the information on our upcoming general election. So we want to make sure you're ready to early vote. Check out the voter guide today. And I will pass it over to our executive director, Adrian.
Thank you, Kamaria, and thank you all for joining us. I think you can hear that there is a lot of work to do, that Demency has their finger on the pulse of all the changes that are coming our way, and we are here to work together. We want to work with advocates and our coalition partners to right the ship for North Carolina. Folks will get copies of all the slides, a recording of the call, and links later this week. I hope that you have identified some action items that you can take so you can be involved and help us in this movement. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good night.